Welcome to the Is It Time for a Lawyer podcast with attorney George Lamb. Each brief episode will focus on a specific legal topic to help you better understand the situation you're in and what your next steps might be. Let's join George for this episode. And friends, we're back in the studio with attorney George Lamb. And George, today we're going to talk in episode 2 about just a general family law overview. Family law is obviously a significant part of your practice. But it's actually a larger area of law than people realize. It's not just divorce. There's a lot of things that come along with it. So let's go ahead and jump in. First of all, you doing okay today? Good to see you.
I am. Good to see you, Jim.
Absolutely. So let's kind of unpack it. What all's in this bucket called family law?
It's a lot of things, a lot of common denominators. So you kind of have two classifications of groups. You have married people and then unmarried folks. Married people, if they're gonna be unmarried, they're going to go through a divorce. You have unmarried people that have some of the issues that go on in a divorce with married people, such as child custody or child support issues, but not necessarily the property division issues. Those are kind of long-term cases. So if you have a divorce case, that's gonna take a little bit. In contrast with other types of family court cases. So you have divorce cases, and then you might have just a straight child custody case, so to speak. You can also have paternity cases that fall under there. That's a little bit different, but similar. You can have domestic violence cases. Now, those are cases that require an immediate need. That is a fast-moving case. We can get into that a little bit. That would be an EPO, DVO, IPO. A lot of these cases, the first two categories being a divorce case or even just a custody case of unmarried parents, that can involve mediation. Mediation's a pretty big part of family court. We can get into how mediation works. So in the divorce context, you have some subsets of that. And so you would have child custody, which is decision-making. A lot of people have a misconception about custody, meaning where my kid sleeps. Does my kid sleep at my house or the other parent's house? Custody is about decision-making. And so you have decision-making over education, healthcare decisions, religious upbringing. Those are decision-making issues that don't necessarily have to do with where the child sleeps at night. And so the presumption is that you're a 50-50 custodian. You're a joint custodian, I'm sorry. And so you have joint decision-making, that you're both fit to be parents. And the burden would be you would have to prove that somebody's unfit. And so we assume in the law that parents are fit. There's a presumption also that the timeshare, some people call it parenting time, some people call it visitation, that's 50-50. I think that, and depending upon your age, I think that that's just the trend now with two working parents, and that's just where it is. So that's where that presumption lies, because I think society has evolved from previous years and previous generations. I just happen to think where that comes from. So along those lines, then you have the issue of child support, and that has a monetary component, as most people know. It also has that's calculated by state law. There's basically a chart. You look at incomes. You factor in the incomes into kind of a matrix, and then based upon how much money each parent makes, the chart kicks out a number, and then based upon the ratio between this parent to that parent, then money may flow from one parent to another. You have to factor in other things like health insurance. Maybe there's child care, which can be expensive. There's uncovered medical expenses that may not be covered by insurance. There's extracurricular activities. All these things can fall into the ambit of child support.
And I've always thought that chart that you referenced is more of a guideline. That's kind of the starting point, right? And then it's all these other things that may or may not actually come into play.
They're actually called the guidelines. It's called the Kentucky Child Support Guidelines, but it is a guideline. And then you'll hear terms like guideline support. But you have to have a basis to start somewhere. You just can't arbitrarily pull out numbers and say, okay, this person makes this much, so it's going to be this much. You have to have some standard to start with. Moving down, I guess you could call it a list. At some point, if you're married and you've been married and there's a marital estate that has evolved or that is developed over time, there's going to be property division issues.
So the marital estate, that term basically just refers to all the stuff, right? All the things that you've accumulated over the years, right?
Sure. Accumulated during the marriage. So
that's assets and liabilities.
That could be assets and liabilities. And so these assets and liabilities have to be distributed, and they have to be equitably distributed, which doesn't mean that the example I give is if you have a car, you don't get out the jaws of life and cut it in half. And so maybe somebody gets that car, and then maybe somebody gets the other car or the value of the car. And so we don't necessarily take things and cut them in two if we don't have to. We try to equitably, in some fashion, distribute these things fairly.
Well, one of the cars may be paid off and the other one's not, so there's all sorts of things that come into that. And that's what a skilled attorney who's been in family law for a number of years is going to kind of take into account. And I would imagine you're going to talk through your client about, hey, wait a minute, before we concede that, understand there's more to it than that. And I think that knowledge, that perspective is some of the value you also bring to the conversation.
Yes, absolutely. So you have to look at how things are titled. If there's debt on them, if there's not debt on them, was this somebody's asset before they got married? You have certain property that is not marital property, that's non-marital if you had it before, if you got it, if you inherited some kind of property, if it was a gift solely to you, then those aren't marital property. Sometimes you can have an asset that kind of has components of both. And so you have to have somebody that can help you figure that out. And you have to calculate these things. And there's laws on this as to how you calculate these mixed bag asset interests. You could have some assets that, as you pointed out, that have a liability, some do not. It can be intricate. It can be a lot. Taxes, tax consequences, tax deductions, tax liabilities. So you have, if you look at a divorce case, you have the people part. Okay. And so you have, we have people and they live in one place and they're ultimately going to live in two places. You have children if you do. And at some point we're going to have to figure out where these people are going to live. That's the people part of the divorce. Then there's the financial part of the divorce. And so you can almost look at those two independently. However, money may flow from one to the other. So they are interrelated.
And they're going to be such for a while anyway. I would think
they will. It depends on the age of your children. If you are going through a divorce, they're minors until they're not.
Well, and that's why I wanted to switch to a slightly different part of the topic here. Is you got to think about the long ball. This is a long game, and so you're going to eventually get to the initial divorce decree, which is okay. The divorce is official. Here it is. But down the road, that decree may need to be modified, and there's a process for that.
There is. Stuff happens and things change. And so what may have worked when you got divorced in, say, year one of the divorce, there could be kids got older, jobs changed, incomes changed. In year 5, let's just say year 0 is the divorce, and then year 5, you could have changes. And there are provisions within the law and standards that you can go through to exact some of those changes. And so you can file for divorce, respond to that, go through the steps. We'll touch on mediation if we have some time. And then what happens is afterwards, if you have a change in circumstances, something happens that changes, you can go back to court and ask the court to change things based on the circumstances that are now.
And that's called a post-decree modification, right?
That is. It's a post-decree modification. Modification meaning change.
Right.
One of the steps, and so if you have unmarried folks, you can still have those child support issues that we just discussed. Unmarried people don't necessarily have a marital estate, so that's a little bit different. You would have child support issues, and that may change over time, just as if they were married. Generally speaking, in a divorce case, if one party files and the other person responds, you have an exchange of financial information. It's called a preliminary, it's a financial disclosure. At some point, there will be a step called, generally speaking, unless there's an exception, mediation. And so what happens is that is that the parties get together and see if they can informally settle the case before going to court and having a full-blown trial or hearing on some or most or all issues. It gives you a chance to try to settle your case where you get an element of choice as opposed to going to court where you don't get a whole lot of choice.
Ultimately, you hand that over to the judge, and the judge who doesn't really know you or your soon-to-be ex-spouse is going to make some decisions based on the material in front of him or her. And so at least, like you said, you maintain a little bit of that control when you're still talking in mediation because it's still a negotiation and you still have an equal voice at the table, I guess.
You do. And you're generally there with your attorney. The other side's generally there with their attorney. And then there's a third, fifth person in the room. Could be a practitioner, could be a retired judge. And what they do is they try to facilitate an agreement between the two camps is really what happens. And it's really a gauge on risk. And so what is your risk versus what you might get in court? And so you're trying to balance what your desired outcome is with the risk that you may not get it or that the other person may get more of it. It just kind of depends, but it's really it's a balancing risk versus what you want.
Well, in litigation takes time. There's a lot of documents that go back and forth. There's a lot of discussions that happen. I would imagine it may ultimately be a little bit more cost effective if you could get these big points or all of it kind of clarified and settled during a mediation versus now we're going to jump into litigation where really sometimes the fireworks really begin.
100%. There's different levels of, anytime you go to court and you're asking the court to do something, that's litigation. Some people think of it as, I'm going to have a trial and we're going to call the witnesses and we're going to go to the judge and try to,
just like on TV.
Just like on TV. And so, right. And so what happens is that mediation is a cost-effective step to try to get those issues resolved where you actually get a choice in the outcome. That's the difference between going to mediation and maybe settling a case of mediation, maybe settling some issues of mediation. And depending upon your case, you can have other expenses that come, not only the cost of an attorney, not only legal fees, but there can be other costs with regard to evidence and what you may be trying to prove or not prove. And so if you are able to settle your case at mediation, generally speaking, you get a choice in it and it's less expensive than not.
That makes a lot of sense. Let me talk just in general about Jefferson County. Now, you practice in Louisville. You go to a few other places, but Louisville's pretty much your home court, if you will. In Jefferson County, you're going to have the same judge through the entire process. Is that right?
Yes, you will. And that's true of any of the family courts that I generally go to. That would be true in Jefferson County. It'd be true in Oldham. It'd be true in Bullitt County. It'd be true in Shelby County. It would be true in Spencer County. It'd be true in Henry County. It's a one judge, one family approach. And so even if you have some ancillary matters that come up, say you have an EPO issue or a child protective services issue, that's a whole other area that we probably won't touch on today, but you're going to get the same judge. And so in Jefferson County, there's more judges than the other jurisdictions just based on size. And so you're assigned a judge, and that's going to be your judge. You're not going to jump from judge to judge.
And even in the post-decree, you're going to come back in front of that same judge down the road?
You're going to come back in front of that same judge so long as that judge is still on the bench, yes.
Wow. That's got its advantages and disadvantages, I would think. And it's rely on your attorney to how you need to behave in front of that judge is probably an important issue. We're all human, right? And so when you get on the bad side, it's kind of hard to rehabilitate and get on the neutral ground or favorable ground if possible.
That can be true. I mean, it's important if you do have to go to court, you do have to be cognizant of how you behave in a courtroom. I think that's true of any case. I think that's true of any case that I do, be it a family court case, if you're in front of a judge in an injury case, if you're in front of a judge in a workers' compensation case, even in a probate case. If you're in a courtroom, you need to be aware that you're in a courtroom.
Yeah. Well, I've always heard that at that point you need to let your lawyer. I mean, this is their venue, not yours necessarily. But George, let's kind of wrap up the episode with this. Obviously, there's an element of wow, I don't know if I really want to do this yet. Maybe I know it's coming. Maybe I've got a little time here. So now we're going to talk a little bit about pre-planning. Does that ever come up? I mean, does that happen in reality?
I think that people inherently pre-plan and they might not even know they're doing it. And so it kind of depends on the catalyst of the situation. So I represent people that file divorce, for example. I represent people that say, I have to file a divorce right now. I represent people that come and say, my spouse just filed divorce. Okay. And so depending upon which side of that you're on, you get the opportunity to plan more than the other. It's kind of commonsensical thinking. One person kind of knows it's coming, at least one. It's sometimes both. And so you can take steps to do some pre-planning before you file a divorce, and can be important. And I can help people with that.
Can you give us kind of a top 3 things?
You want to, it depends. I'll do it this way. You got to watch the bank accounts. You got to kind of see what's going on with your money. I think you should do that anyway, regardless if you're getting divorced or not. But I think that if you're in a situation where you are living with somebody or married to somebody, even if you're married or unmarried, and you're sharing some sort of living expenses, you're sharing some sort of assets, then you need to have your finger on the pulse of where your money is. And I don't think it should take a lawyer to tell you that. I just think that you should do that. That's what I would tell any family member of mine. That's what I would tell any friend of mine. That's what I would tell any of my children. I think that's important, especially if you're going to go through a divorce, because at some point, likely these assets are going to be divided.
So number 1 would be come up to speed on the financial situation.
I would think that that's something that you could do on your own without having to talk to the other person. If you're in a stressful situation, divorces are stressful, and you're generally living under the same roof. And there's certain things that you can look at without upsetting the apple cart in the house and try to figure out what's going on. And it's not just what you have, it's where's your stuff going. And so you kind of want to look at where the spending's going as well. You want to look at your liabilities. You want to see what's going on there. It could be that you may need to find a place to live. And so, and that may not be in the short term, but in the long game, at some point, if people aren't going to be together anymore, somebody's going to have to go somewhere, or both people are going to have to go somewhere. And so that's part of the investigative process, I would say. What you might want to do, it depends. If you know that you're going to go through a divorce, probably a good idea to retain counsel. I would say that at that point, you're ready to go. If you think that your spouse or your significant other is gonna start litigation against you, probably a good idea to retain counsel, because at least you're ready to go in case something happens. And so, but depending upon your situation and depending upon what's going on in your house, and I believe this, you never know what's going on in somebody else's house, but you're going to know what's going on in your house. You're going to have the pulse of what's happening. You're going to know when something's not right. And if you do, you probably want to step back and take a look at those things. And if you do, and you can never be totally prepared, but if you can prepare yourself to the extent that you can, I think that what you want in the end game, you're going to have a better chance of getting.
That makes a lot of sense. George, let me ask you this. If somebody is thinking, wow, that might be coming, or maybe I'm thinking about filing a divorce, or maybe their spouse has already filed, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
The best way for them to get a hold of me is my cell phone number. It's 502-640-9797. Call me, text me, and I'll be happy to talk to you.
Outstanding. George, I want to thank you for the information here, and I hope if you're listening to this, you kind of got a little bit of an idea about what it's like to go through this process, and ultimately how George may be able to help you if you need his help. So from all of us here at the podcast, we are going to be back in about 2 weeks, and we'll have another episode. So be sure to check us out on Facebook, check us out on possibly YouTube, and a few other places where we're going to upload these podcasts: Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, all those fun places. But George, once again, I know you're a busy guy. I really appreciate your time. Look forward to talking to you here in about 2 weeks.
Thanks, Jim.
Take care. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to the Is It Time for a Lawyer podcast with attorney George Lamb. We hope you found the discussion informative and helpful. The comments George made are not meant to be legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship. However, if it is time for a lawyer, George is ready to listen. Be sure to share this episode on your social media. George will be back in 2 weeks with his next episode. Thanks again for listening.